I'm Rowan, 38M, and I've had decades of practice swallowing my words. In my family, speaking up about anything, feeling unwell, being treated unfairly, even just disagreeing, is an open invitation for ridicule. It's not that they don't hear you. It's that they turn whatever you say into ammunition. My older brother, Damon, 41M, is the worst for this. Growing up, he was the center of attention, the one my parents proudly described as strong and hardworking. And sure, he was athletic, loud, and always knew how to charm people, but it came at my expense. If I did something well, Damon would find a way to make it a joke. If I struggled, he'd make sure everyone knew. Over the years, I learned to keep my head down. Then there's Aunt Lorna, my father's older sister. She has the same cold smile as my dad when she's about to put you in your place. She has this habit of turning any situation into a test of character, and no matter what you do, you fail it unless it's done her way. She and Damon are thick as thieves, constantly validating each other's worst qualities. A few weeks ago, Lorna decided she was going to host a proper family gathering. The kind where she invites you under the guise of a meal and some catching up, then hands out tasks like she's running a work crew. The moment I stepped through her front door, I knew I'd walked into one of those setups. The dining room table was bare, chairs stacked in the corner. Out back, the yard was half covered in folded tables, crates of drinks, and plastic tubs full of decorations. The air was thick with the smell of grilling meat, not because lunch was ready, but because Lorna had decided the food should be cooked while we worked so the aroma would make it feel festive. The first words out of her mouth weren't hello. They were, "Rowan, good. You can start unloading the crates in the garage. Damon will coordinate." Coordinate turned out to mean Damon standing with a clipboard in one hand and a drink in the other, calling out instructions like he was running a sports team. When I bent to pick up the first crate, I realized it was heavier than I expected, full of bottled drinks, and awkward to carry through the narrow garage doorway. My arms ached almost immediately, but I set it down where Damon pointed without saying anything. The morning wore on like that, lugging chairs, moving coolers, stringing lights along the back fence. By the third trip hauling chairs, I felt that familiar buzzing in my head, the one I get when I'm lightheaded. I told myself it was nothing, just that I hadn't had enough water yet. But even after I took a sip from my bottle, the dizziness didn't really go away. When I paused for a moment near the patio to steady myself, Damon strolled past, glancing at me with a smirk. "What's wrong, Rowan? Already tired?" "We've barely started," he said, loud enough for our cousins to hear. A couple of them chuckled. I forced a laugh, hoping to make it seem like I was in on the joke, then went to get more chairs. But each time I stood up from bending over, my vision swam just a little longer. At one point, I leaned against the side of the house, hoping no one would notice. That's when Lorna appeared in the doorway, her voice clipped. "Rowan, if you need a break, take it. But don't stand around looking like something's wrong. It sends the wrong message." "The wrong message?" I asked before I could stop myself. "That you're trying to get out of helping," she replied smoothly, then moved on without waiting for an answer. That comment hit harder than I wanted to admit. My whole life, I've been accused of not pulling my weight, even when I'm quietly doing more than my share. I pushed myself harder, determined not to give her another reason to say it. By noon, my shirt clung to me with sweat, my hands trembled, and there was this odd pressure behind my eyes. I sat on the back steps for a moment, telling myself I'd get up in just a minute. That's when Damon's voice came again, sharper this time. "Rowan, what are you doing? We still need those tablecloths." "You're fine. Quit whining." I opened my mouth to tell him I wasn't whining, but the words stuck. My throat felt dry, my heartbeat uneven. I stood, too quickly, and the world tilted sideways. I caught myself against the wall, gripping it like a lifeline. Somewhere behind me, I heard my cousin Leah say, "You don't look okay." But then Lorna's voice cut in, louder. "He's fine. He just doesn't like the work. Honestly, Rowan, you've always been too sensitive." She gestured toward the kitchen. "Go inside if you need to recover." The way she said recover made it sound like I was playing a part. I let her steer me into the kitchen, my legs heavier with each step. She left me at the breakfast bar with a glass of water, muttering something about how, "At least now you won't be in the way." I don't know how long I sat there, but the next thing I remember is the sound of the sliding door opening and Clara, a family friend, stepping in. Clara's a nurse, and the moment her eyes landed on me, her expression shifted. Rowan, how long have you been feeling like this? She asked, already moving closer. Before I could answer, she was pulling a blood pressure cuff out of her bag. As it tightened around my arm, I noticed the faint crease forming between her eyebrows. She checked the screen, then checked it again. Her voice dropped slightly, but I still heard the change in tone. I need someone to help me here now. And that was the moment everything froze. Damon, who had been leaning against the doorway with his usual smirk, suddenly looked uncertain. Lorna's face, which had been tight with authority and control just moments ago, shifted into something else, a mixture of confusion, irritation, and calculation. Clara didn't wait for anyone's approval. She knelt beside me, her hands steady but firm, and repeated, "Rowan, your blood pressure is dangerously high. You need to sit completely still. Are you feeling any chest pain or dizziness?" I tried to answer, but my throat was dry and my voice barely came out as a whisper. "Just lightheaded." "That's enough for now," Clara said, then looked directly at Damon and Lorna. Her tone was sharp, carrying that professional authority that silences most people instantly. "Step back. He's not faking this. Help me get him out of the kitchen so he can sit somewhere safer." Damon laughed nervously at first, trying to brush it off. "It's just stress. He probably hasn't been lifting enough lately. Right, Rowan?" I wanted to yell that I wasn't joking, that I felt like I was going to collapse if I didn't sit down, but my body refused to obey. My hands trembled, my vision blurred, and the only thing keeping me upright was the counter and Clara's firm grip. "That's enough, Damon," Clara said. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "I'm not here to debate. Step aside." Lorna's jaw tightened, and I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. She never liked being challenged, especially in front of others, and right now, she was losing control. "This is ridiculous," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "He's fine. He's just," she trailed off, trying to find a word that would dismiss the seriousness. "Dramatic." Clara didn't acknowledge her. She carefully guided me toward the living room, checking my pulse as we went. I was aware of every step, every breath, and every horrified glance from the younger cousins, who suddenly realized this wasn't just another one of Rowan's overreactions. Once I was seated in the living room, Clara had Damon and Lorna help her stabilize me. She checked my blood pressure again, then shook her head slightly. "This is very high. You're at risk. You need medical attention immediately." That statement broke the last layer of composure Lorna had. "Medical attention? Here? For what?" "A little lightheadedness." "This is preposterous. You're scaring everyone over nothing." Damon chimed in, too, trying to regain control. "See? He's fine. Look at him sitting there. He just needs to calm down." Clara turned toward both of them, her eyes sharp. "I've been a nurse long enough to know when someone is in danger. Step back." Now, I could feel my brother and aunt exchanging a look, a combination of disbelief and anger. Neither of them liked to be proven wrong, especially not in front of the rest of the family. And yet, for the first time in years, no one dared argue with Clara. The room had gone silent. Even the cousins were staring at Lorna and Damon, waiting to see what they would do. And that's when the real game started. Lorna's voice dropped to a low, measured tone, the one that always sent shivers down my spine. "Clara, you don't understand. This family has traditions. We don't involve outsiders in our affairs. Rowan, get up. You're making a scene. You're embarrassing all of us." I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't form words. My heart was racing, and my body felt like it was betraying me. I leaned back, gripping the edge of the couch, wishing I could just vanish. Damon, sensing that Lorna had taken the lead, added, "Honestly, everyone's just overreacting. You're letting this ruin the day, Rowan. Maybe you should leave if you can't handle it." The cruelty was almost tangible, deliberate. They weren't worried about me, not even a little. They were worried about appearances, about controlling the narrative. If anything, my collapse was an inconvenience that needed to be minimized. Their concern wasn't for my well-being, it was for their ego. Clara, however, wasn't going to let them dictate the situation. She pulled her phone out and started dialing. "I'm calling emergency services. He's not safe to remain here without monitoring." At that, Lorna's composure cracked entirely. She moved closer to Clara, her face rigid, teeth clenched. "Absolutely not. I will not have a professional humiliating my family like this. This is my house, my rules. Rowan, get up this instant, or I'll handle it myself." "Damon, catching her tone, stepped forward as if to back her up, but there was hesitation in his movements. I think part of him realized that this wasn't a joke anymore, that his brother might actually be in serious danger. But the more dangerous part was how the two of them started coordinating silently, their faces hardening. Lorna spoke first. "Clara, you don't know what's good for him. We raised him. We know him better than anyone else. You're overreacting. He's fine. He's just pretending again, isn't he?" I couldn't believe the words. Pretending. After the room had gone quiet, after I'd nearly collapsed twice, after my pulse was racing and my hands shook. They were still trying to frame this as drama, as manipulation. The same story they'd always told about me whenever I showed any weakness. Clara's voice cut through, sharp and unwavering. "Rowan's not pretending. I've taken vitals. I've assessed him. He needs immediate evaluation. Step aside, or I will call for assistance and have him transported by ambulance." At that, Damon's face hardened. Lorna's lips pressed into a thin line. Their eyes met in the way they always did when forming a plan. A silent agreement to maintain control, to spin the story, to protect themselves. And I realized in that moment that the danger wasn't just the physical risk I was in, but the calculated psychological assault that would follow. For decades, this family had perfected the art of twisting reality to their advantage. And now, faced with the undeniable proof that something was seriously wrong, they weren't backing down. They were preparing their next move. I leaned back on the couch, drained, shaking, and suddenly aware of every person in the room staring at me. The younger cousins looked worried, confused. Clara was firm, moving between them and me like a shield. And Damon and Lorna, they were plotting. I could see it in the cold glint of their eyes. The silence stretched. I didn't know what they were going to do next, but I knew it wouldn't be kind. I knew it wouldn't be fair. I knew that whatever came next was going to be a deliberate attempt to humiliate, manipulate, and assert their control over me. The same pattern that had haunted my entire life. And then, just as Clara stood to insist I be taken to the hospital, Lorna said something that made my stomach drop. "If you touch him, you'll regret it." The room went completely still after that. Even Clara, normally unshakable, paused. Damon's smirk was gone. He looked wary, almost calculating. And I knew, in that moment, that nothing was going to be simple. Nothing was going to be straightforward. This wasn't just about a fainting episode or high blood pressure. This was a chess game. And for the first time in years, I was a piece that mattered in a way I couldn't ignore. And that's when the turning point hit. Not physically, but psychologically. The family that had tormented me for decades had just made it crystal clear that they would stop at nothing to assert their control, even in a situation that was dangerously real. Clara's hands hovered over my shoulders, ready to act. Damon and Lorna were tense, their voices low but sharp. And I realized that this day, this ordinary family gathering that I had expected to survive quietly, was about to spiral into something much bigger, something carefully planned, and something that would change the way I saw my family forever. I could feel it in the air, the calm before the storm, and I knew the next move would define everything. Clara's presence was the only thing keeping me upright. I could feel the tremor in my body slowly settling into a cold, hard awareness. The day that was supposed to be simple, just a family gathering, had transformed into a battleground I hadn't seen coming. Damon and Lorna were standing side by side, a silent alliance forged over years of shared manipulation, and I knew exactly what they were capable of when they felt cornered. Lorna was the first to move, her steps deliberate, each one echoing across the hardwood floor. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, surveying me as if I were a malfunctioning machine that needed correcting. Her fingers drummed lightly against her hip, a signal I had learned over the years meant that she had already decided the next move. Damon mirrored her posture, leaning slightly forward, his jaw tight. The playful smirk that usually decorated his face was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. Clara knelt beside me again, her hands firm on my shoulders. "Rowan, I need you to stay seated. You're not safe to move on your own. Emergency services are on the way." Lorna's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. Instead, she looked at Damon and spoke in that low, sharp tone that always made the younger cousins flinch. "We can handle this ourselves. I've dealt with him before. We know what he's capable of. He's probably just tired or dehydrated. We don't need outsiders making a fuss." Damon's nod was slow, deliberate, but there was a shadow of uncertainty in his eyes. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if I weren't there. Maybe she's right, Aunt Lorna. We've seen him collapse before. It's dramatic, yes, but it's never serious. I could barely hold myself upright, and every word they said felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. This wasn't just denial. This was a deliberate attempt to control the narrative, to make it seem like I was exaggerating. And the cruel thing was, everyone in the room could sense it. The cousins exchanged uncomfortable glances. A couple of them looked to Clara, seeking guidance, but they didn't intervene. Lorna and Damon had built a reputation of authority in the family, and it was enough that most people hesitated. Clara's gaze moved from me to them and back again. I'm not here to argue about his past. I'm here to prevent a serious medical emergency. Step back. Lorna's lips pressed into a tight line. Her voice was quiet now, almost dangerous. You're not going to embarrass us in front of everyone. He's just overreacting, and you know it. It hit me then, the true scale of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about denying my illness. This was about public perception. They weren't concerned about my health. They were worried about being seen as anything less than perfect in front of the rest of the family. And if that meant risking my safety, so be it. Damon leaned in slightly, his voice smooth but sharp. Clara, maybe we should give him a few minutes to settle down. We don't need to make this a spectacle. He's always been a bit fragile, hasn't he? Clara's hands tightened on my shoulders, and I could feel the strength in her posture, a contrast to the deliberate menace radiating from Damon and Lorna. Rowan's fragile is not the issue. His blood pressure is dangerously high. If we don't act now, it could escalate rapidly. For a moment, the room was silent. The younger cousins, who had been whispering among themselves, stopped. Even the background sounds of the party, the grill outside, the clatter of dishes being prepared, faded into the tense quiet that had settled like a weight over the room. And in that silence, I could see it clearly. The cold, calculated look on Lorna's face. The way Damon was shifting his weight as if planning his next move. The way they both were trying to regain control over a situation that was spiraling beyond their hands. Then Lorna spoke again, her voice quiet but razor sharp. We'll handle him. Clara, you're overstepping. We raised him. We know what's best. You need to step back. Clara's response was calm but firm. I'm not stepping back. He needs care. If you interfere, it could be dangerous. The moment stretched, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. It was like watching two forces collide. One side grounded in authority, experience, and fearlessness. The other side driven entirely by ego, control, and manipulation. Damon stepped closer, putting his hand lightly on my shoulder, not to help, but to assert dominance. Rowan, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Just sit still and we'll handle it. I wanted to shout that I wasn't fine, that I needed real help, but my body felt uncooperative. My arms trembled, my legs shook, and every movement was an effort. I could only stare at them, the realization settling like ice in my chest. They weren't going to help me. Not genuinely. They were going to spin this, manipulate it, and try to make it seem like I was the problem, like I had created this chaos. Clara, sensing the brewing conflict, took a step back but didn't loosen her grip. Rowan, emergency services are on their way. Stay with me. No one is leaving you alone, not until they arrive. And that's when it happened. Lorna's eyes flashed with a calculated coldness I had seen before, in moments when she needed to control people through fear. Fine, she said quietly, her voice almost serene. We'll let them come. But don't expect anyone to forgive him for this drama later. Everyone will remember this, the scene he caused. And Rowan, you'll hear about it for years. Damon, reading her cues, smirked faintly. Yeah, this will be one of those stories everyone tells. He's going to be the dramatic one again, isn't he? Even through the haze of dizziness and fear, I understood. This wasn't just about the fainting episode or the high blood pressure. This was about reputation, humiliation, and control. They weren't just trying to dismiss my condition. They were planning the aftermath, how to make me the villain in my own crisis. I tried to sit straighter, to steady myself, but my vision blurred, and I could hear Clara muttering under her breath about getting me to the hospital immediately. The younger cousins were fidgeting, glancing nervously between Clara and Lorna, sensing the tension. Lorna leaned back slightly, satisfied with the intimidation, while Damon stayed close, his smirk returning just enough to remind everyone of his dominance. "Rowan," Lorna said softly, but with venom hidden in the calmness. "If this turns out to be nothing, you'll have to work twice as hard to earn our trust again. We won't forget this." It was a threat wrapped in polite words, a promise of punishment disguised as familial concern. And in that moment, I realized that whatever happened next, whether I survived this episode or not, the fallout would be carefully orchestrated against me. Clara's hands were still on my shoulders, guiding me gently, but I could see the strain in her eyes. She understood the dynamic. She understood that they weren't just dismissing me because of concern. They were actively planning to manipulate the situation to their advantage. The doorbell rang. Emergency services. Finally. But even that relief was tempered by the knowledge that Damon and Lorna wouldn't relent, that they were already calculating their next move. I wasn't just a patient now. I was a piece on their board, and the game had only just begun. And as the paramedics entered, assessing me quickly, Lorna whispered to Damon, low enough that only he could hear, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. When this is done, he will pay for embarrassing us. We'll make sure of it." Damon nodded, eyes glinting with the same cold certainty. I realized then that the real danger wasn't my blood pressure or my dizziness. It was them. Their meticulous, deliberate cruelty. And no one else in the room would stop them. The ride to the hospital was quiet. Too quiet. Clara had insisted I sit in the back seat of her car, just in case I became dizzy again, while the younger cousins trailed along in another vehicle, their faces pale and silent. Damon and Lorna had been left behind at the house, and though I didn't see them, I felt their presence looming over the day like a shadow that refused to lift. At the hospital, the situation became even more surreal. My blood pressure was sky high, and the nurse on duty took one look at the readings and called for immediate observation. Clara stayed by my side, speaking quietly with the staff, but I kept catching glimpses of my reflection in the polished hospital surfaces, pale, sweating, shaking, and utterly aware of how vulnerable I felt. And I knew, even now, that Damon and Lorna would spin this. Sure enough, within an hour, the first wave of texts and calls came. Damon had been messaging the other relatives, describing the scene at Lorna's house in his version. I had apparently collapsed over nothing, caused a scene, and humiliated the family in front of everyone. Lorna had sent her own messages, this time more insidious. She emphasized how dramatic I was, how I was trying to ruin the gathering for everyone, and subtly added that Clara had overreacted. I read the messages on my phone while hooked up to N4, feeling my pulse spike not from illness but from fury. They were already turning my near collapse into a weapon against me. Every word carefully chosen to maintain their image of control, of perfection, while painting me as unstable and unworthy of sympathy. That night, I barely slept. My body was exhausted, but my mind raced. For years, I had internalized the idea that keeping quiet was safer, that endurance was the only way to survive my family. But this had gone too far. I realized that if I didn't take control, I would be at the mercy of their stories, their manipulations, for the rest of my life. The next day, when I was released from observation, I returned home with Clara's assistance. She stayed a little longer to make sure I had the resources I needed, from water and snacks to basic guidance on how to manage stress and prevent another spike in blood pressure. She didn't leave until she was certain I could manage on my own. Once she left, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about how Damon and Lorna had already started the campaign to frame me. And that's when it hit me. If they were going to play this game, I would have to play it back, but carefully, deliberately, with precision. I couldn't just react emotionally. I needed a strategy. I needed to expose them for what they were while protecting myself. The first step was documenting everything. I spent the next several days going through every text, email, and conversation. I wrote down exactly what had happened at Lorna's house, step by step, including every cruel word Damon and Lorna had said. I even reached out to a few of the younger cousins privately, gently asking them to confirm what they'd seen. Some were hesitant. After all, fear of Lorna's influence ran deep. But a couple quietly admitted they had seen the smirking, the deliberate humiliation, the way I had been dismissed despite being genuinely unwell. It became clear very quickly. The family had a pattern, not an accident. Damon and Lorna thrived on control. They weren't merely dismissive. They orchestrated situations where I, or anyone who wasn't in their favor, would appear weak, dramatic, or incompetent. Every dinner, every holiday, every casual gathering had some subtle measure of manipulation. And now, with my health incident, they thought they could publicly paint me as unstable and continue the narrative. I knew I couldn't confront them head-on yet. They were practiced manipulators. Any direct challenge would be twisted and turned against me immediately. So I began a different approach: observation, patience, and slow accumulation of leverage. I started by tracking their patterns. Damon's smirks, the timing of Lorna's jabs, the way they influenced the cousins' perceptions. It all had a rhythm, a predictable cadence, if you paid close enough attention. Then I began planting the seeds of exposure. I started with subtle documentation of their behavior at every family gathering: photos, discrete audio recordings, detailed notes. Nothing overt at first. I needed incontrovertible proof, things that couldn't be spun or twisted. Meanwhile, I quietly reached out to the cousins I could trust. I knew they were intimidated by Lorna and Damon's reputation, but I also knew that if I could present the evidence in a controlled way, they would see the truth. Weeks passed, and the campaign of subtle revenge took shape. I didn't act rashly. I didn't send angry texts or confront them publicly. Instead, I waited for the perfect moments to reveal facts that couldn't be ignored. The first opportunity came at a minor family gathering, a simple Sunday brunch at Lorna's house. I arrived late, claiming a previous commitment, which immediately drew Damon's annoyance. Lorna's eyes narrowed the moment she saw me. I could feel the tension radiating from her. As I entered, Damon tried the usual: a half-hearted smirk, a joking jab about my fragile health. "Careful, Rowan," he said casually, "don't faint again. You might scare everyone." I smiled faintly, letting the comment slide, but my mind was racing. I had brought with me a small folder, nothing dramatic, just notes and documentation. I had rehearsed the plan carefully, nothing accusatory, only facts, presented calmly and with the weight of evidence. The brunch proceeded, and Damon and Lorna tried their usual tactics: subtle digs, rolling eyes when I spoke, orchestrating situations where I would appear indecisive or flustered. But I was ready. Each time they tried to manipulate the situation, I recorded it quietly on my phone. Each whispered jab, each smirk, each calculated insult was being preserved. By the end of the brunch, I had enough material to begin shaping the narrative. I didn't confront them yet. I let the smirks and subtle cruelty hang in the air, knowing the longer I waited, the more undeniable the pattern would become. My revenge wouldn't be dramatic or explosive at first. It would be meticulous, patient, and undeniable. Over the next month, I carefully built an archive of every interaction: texts, emails, photos, recordings, and statements from cousins who were willing to admit the truth. Every time Damon or Lorna tried to assert control, I added to the collection. I started to see their cracks. Damon became impatient when his smirks failed to elicit reactions. Lorna began overcompensating with increasingly rigid behavior. I could feel the power shift subtly, though they didn't realize it yet. Then came the first calculated exposure. I sent a carefully worded email to a distant relative, someone who had always been observant and impartial, including a few documented examples of Damon and Lorna's manipulations. No accusations, just facts. The response was immediate. That relative, horrified, quietly confirmed the pattern with a few other family members, all of whom had previously been too intimidated to speak. I could sense the tension starting to build within the family. Damon and Lorna didn't know it yet, but the first cracks were appearing. The smirks, the jabs, the carefully curated public image. All of it was about to unravel, piece by piece. The final act of the plan unfolded over months. Each step carefully measured, each move deliberate. I didn't rush. Damon and Lorna were masters of control, but they had underestimated one thing: patience backed by evidence. The first breakthrough came at the next major family gathering, Aunt Lorna's so-called holiday brunch, where she insisted that appearances mattered above all else. I arrived quietly, carrying a small folder of carefully curated documentation: texts, photos, voice notes, and detailed records of every manipulation and cruel remark. I had shared copies with a few cousins in advance, the ones I knew could be trusted. They were ready to corroborate everything I presented quietly, without being accused of disloyalty by the others. As soon as I walked in, Damon attempted his usual theatrics. "Careful, Rowan," he said with a smirk that had worked so many times before. "You don't want to faint in front of everyone again." But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't lower my head or mutter an apology. I smiled faintly and set the folder on the table in front of him, opening it slowly. "Actually," I said, calm and deliberate, "I think it's time everyone sees exactly what's been happening." The younger cousins in the room shifted nervously, glancing at each other, while Lorna's face tightened. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, but she said nothing, trying to maintain control. I started presenting the evidence carefully, methodically. Text messages, screenshots of emails, photos showing deliberate attempts to humiliate me at previous gatherings, and voice notes where Damon's mocking tone and Lorna's calculated remarks were undeniable. I laid out each example in chronological order, connecting patterns, showing the repeated psychological manipulation, and finally, including Clara's statements about my real medical incident, proof that I had nearly been dismissed dangerously just for appearances. The room went completely silent. Damon's smirk faltered and disappeared. Lorna's face shifted through disbelief, anger, and finally a thin veneer of control that barely hid her panic. Their eyes darted around the room, trying to gauge reactions, but the cousins I had prepared were quiet witnesses, confirming each point as I laid it out. "This," I said, holding up the folder for everyone to see, "is what has been happening for years. This isn't a one-time misunderstanding. This is deliberate. And for anyone who thinks I'm exaggerating, the evidence is right here." The impact was immediate. Several cousins who had always been hesitant to speak now nodded, whispering confirmations. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. Damon and Lorna were no longer in control. They were cornered, and they knew it. Damon tried to interrupt. "This is ridiculous, Rowan. You're making a scene again." I held up a hand. "No, Damon. I'm showing the truth. You've spent decades controlling the narrative, twisting reality, and humiliating people for your own amusement. That stops now." Lorna's voice was quiet, almost serpentine, trying to regain composure. "You think this changes anything? This family knows the truth already. You're just trying to shame us." But the cousins who had seen everything stepped forward. "No, Aunt Lorna," one of them said quietly but firmly. "We've seen it too. We know. We've been too scared to speak up before." I could see the panic building in Lorna's eyes. Damon's face was pale, his usual confident posture gone. The power that had always protected them, their control over appearances and their ability to manipulate perception, was gone. They were exposed. From that point on, things began to shift irrevocably. The family gatherings changed. Damon's jokes lost their bite. Lorna's scolding no longer carried the same weight. The cousins and relatives who had previously been silent now had evidence to defend themselves if necessary. I had leveled the playing field with nothing more than patience, evidence, and careful planning. Over the following weeks, I continued documenting and sharing selectively with relatives, making it impossible for Damon and Lorna to regain their influence. Their attempts to whisper, manipulate, or control the narrative failed because the proof was irrefutable and widely distributed among family members. They realized too late that their previous strategies, based on fear and manipulation, had no effect anymore. Damon and Lorna never apologized. In fact, they withdrew almost entirely from family functions, their smirks replaced with tense, wary expressions. Their attempts to assert dominance now backfired every time because anyone who witnessed it knew exactly what had happened. The story of their cruelty had spread quietly but effectively. For me, it was a liberation I hadn't felt in decades. I no longer feared the narrative they controlled. I didn't need to endure their smirks or their calculated insults. I was no longer a passive participant in their games. And while I didn't forgive them, not for a single manipulation, humiliation, or attempt to control me, I no longer needed to fear them either. The final situation was clear. Damon and Lorna were isolated, stripped of their influence over the family. I had reclaimed control over my own story, and for the first time, I could attend family events without dread, without anxiety, without being at the mercy of their cruelty. I was still Rowan, still cautious, but finally empowered. And as for them, they remained villains in the eyes of everyone who had witnessed the truth. Their arrogance, manipulation, and deliberate attempts to humiliate and control had been fully exposed. They had spent decades trying to dominate others, only to find themselves powerless when confronted with the patience and planning of someone they had underestimated. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply lived in the knowledge that the truth had been revealed, and for once, the family no longer had a puppet to manipulate. Damon and Lorna were still there, still breathing, still scheming, but the power dynamic had shifted entirely, and I would never let them dominate my life again. The moment was quiet, but it was absolute. I had won, not with anger, not with rash action, but with careful strategy, patience, and the undeniable force of truth. And in the end, the family knew who the real villains were. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. My name's Nash, and I grew up in a family where appearances mattered more than anything else. To outsiders, my family seemed picture perfect. Big Sunday dinners, smiles for church, matching sweaters for holidays. Inside, though, it was different. My mom, Clara, ruled the house with a kind of sharp-edged charm that could cut you down while keeping her lipstick perfectly in place. She cared about how we looked, what people thought, and how much control she had. My dad, Everett, was more of a background presence, always there, rarely speaking, like a piece of furniture everyone forgot to dust. Then there was Aunt Marlene, my mom's sister. If my mom was a knife, Marlene was sandpaper. She'd grind you down slowly, always with that little smirk like she was in on a joke no one else understood. Between the two of them, every family gathering felt like I was walking into an ambush. Now, the setting for all this was one of our so-called family dinners. These weren't casual meals, they were productions. The table had to be set a certain way, everyone had to dress a certain way, and conversations were supposed to stay polite. If you stepped out of line, say, by mentioning something my mom didn't want discussed, you'd get the look. If you kept going, you'd get humiliated in front of everyone. That night started like the others. I showed up wearing what she had suggested in her text, dark slacks and a button-up. The table was already crowded with relatives when I arrived. My parents at the head, Aunt Marlene perched to my mom's left, my cousin Ezra scrolling through his phone like he'd rather be anywhere else, and a couple of other family members who tended to stay quiet. When I walked in, I immediately noticed how forced the atmosphere felt. The smell of roasted chicken and herbs filled the air, but there was this underlying tension, like everyone was waiting for the first spark. My mom gave me a once-over before I even sat down. "You're late," she said, though I wasn't. "I came straight from work," I replied. "Then you should plan better," she snapped back, as if punctuality was a moral failing. I sat down quietly, trying to let it roll off me. That was always the safest option. Keep my head down, don't give her an opening. But of course, Marlene leaned in with that grin. Always making an entrance, "Huh, Nash?" Some things never change. It was harmless on the surface, but with her, everything had a barb. My mom chuckled like it was the cleverest thing she'd ever heard. Dinner started, and as usual, the conversation revolved around whatever made my mom look good. Ezra's grades? Brushed aside. My new project at work? Barely acknowledged. But when Marlene mentioned how perfectly my mom's garden looked this season, suddenly we were all expected to gush like it was a miracle of nature. Halfway through, I began to feel off. Not just tired or stressed, something was really wrong. My chest tightened, and my hands started shaking under the table. I reached for my water glass, trying to steady myself, but even lifting it felt heavy. My vision blurred for a second, and I gripped the edge of the table to ground myself. "Careful," Marlene drawled, eyes narrowing. "He looks like he's about to faint." Always did like being dramatic. A couple of people chuckled softly. I tried to ignore it, tried to breathe through whatever was happening, but the more I focused on staying calm, the worse it got. My mom noticed the way I clutched the table, and instead of asking if I was all right, she leaned toward me, her voice a hiss meant only for me. "You're just trying to ruin dinner. Don't you dare start something here." I wanted to speak up, to tell her I wasn't pretending, but my throat tightened. The room swayed around me. Marlene smirked across the table, and I caught Ezra rolling his eyes like I was putting on some kind of show. That's when my chair scraped loudly as I tried to steady myself, and the whole table went quiet for the first time all evening. Everyone was staring, waiting to see what I'd do, whether I'd prove my mom right or wrong in their eyes. So there I was, gripping the table like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. The clatter of forks against plates had stopped, and every pair of eyes was fixed on me. The room that had been full of chatter just minutes before was now suffocating in silence. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each second dragging on like it was mocking me. I tried to steady my breathing, but it came out shallow and uneven. My chest felt tight, as though an invisible band was constricting it. My hands were clammy, knuckles pale where they clenched the polished wood. The scent of roasted chicken, once comforting, now turned my stomach, making me nauseous. My mom, Clara, leaned closer, her nails tapping against her wine glass in that sharp, deliberate rhythm she always used when she was irritated. Her eyes were narrowed, lips pressed into a smile that didn't reach them. "Sit up straight," she whispered, the tone laced with warning rather than concern. "Everyone's watching. Don't make a spectacle." As if on cue, Marlene let out a soft laugh. Not loud enough to be overtly cruel, but just enough to let me know she found amusement in my struggle. She tilted her head, fork poised elegantly in her hand, and said, "He always did know how to steal the spotlight. Nash, if you needed attention, darling, there are easier ways." A few of the cousins chuckled under their breath, probably not even realizing the effect it had on me. But Ezra, he didn't laugh. He sighed audibly, dragging his hand down his face before muttering, "Unbelievable." Always something with him. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but my words came out slurred. I don't feel right." That should have been enough to alarm anyone. A normal family might have immediately asked if I needed help, or at least shown some concern. But in my family, any sign of weakness was treated like ammunition. Marlene smirked. "Of course you don't feel right. You never do. It's always some crisis with you, isn't it? Remember the graduation party? You had to leave early because of your stomach pains. And now this? At dinner? It's practically tradition at this point." Her voice dripped with that false sweetness that made everything sting worse. My mom gave a small, tight laugh, trying to ease the tension by making it seem like Marlene was just teasing, but there was no mistaking the edge in her gaze when she looked back at me. "You need to pull yourself together," Clara said under her breath. "Do not embarrass me in front of everyone." Her words cut deeper than the pain coursing through my chest. I wanted to tell her it wasn't about her, that something was seriously wrong. But when I tried to form the words, I could barely manage a whisper. My vision blurred again, and I gripped the table tighter, my chair screeching as it shifted beneath me. Ezra muttered something about me being pathetic, and Marlene's smirk only widened. The rest of the family sat frozen, unsure of whether to intervene or simply watch the spectacle unfold. That's when it happened. My fork slipped from my trembling hand and clattered onto the plate, the sharp sound breaking the heavy silence. It was such a small thing, but it seemed to echo through the room like a warning bell. I rasped, barely audible. "Help." For a split second, there was a flicker of something in my dad's eyes. Hesitation, maybe even concern, but it vanished almost immediately as he lowered his gaze back to his plate, pretending to focus on cutting his chicken. It was Marlene who filled the silence, of course. She leaned back in her chair, shaking her head like she was exasperated. "You see what I mean? Always so theatrical. I swear, if he had been born in another time, he'd have been on stage somewhere, fainting on cue for applause." The words buzzed around me, but the pain in my chest was growing sharper, radiating down my arm. My breaths came quicker now, shallow and desperate. My mom noticed, but instead of alarm, there was irritation etched across her face. "You're ruining dinner," she hissed again, her grip tightening on my arm. "Enough of this nonsense. Sit still and stop drawing attention." Her nails dug into my sleeve, holding me down as though she could force me to behave the way she wanted. It wasn't until my body betrayed me, my knees buckling, chair toppling backward, that the room finally erupted. Gasps echoed, someone shouted my name, and the sound of cutlery hitting plates filled the air. I was dimly aware of hitting the floor, the cool tiles pressing against my cheek. The voices around me blurred together, overlapping in a mixture of panic and disbelief. Is he actually?" One of the cousins stammered. "Get up, Nash." My mom's voice snapped, her heels clicking as she moved around the table. "This is ridiculous. You are not going to lie there on the floor like a child." But I couldn't get up. No matter how much I wanted to, my body refused to cooperate. My chest ached, my head swam, and the room spun in dizzying circles. It was Marlene who stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming as she leaned down slightly. "Look at him," she said, almost gleeful. Such commitment to the act. If I didn't know better, I'd almost believe it myself. Her smirk was the last thing I saw before my vision tunneled, the edges darkening. I heard someone shout that they were calling for help, though my mom immediately tried to protest. "Don't you dare," she snapped. "He doesn't need an ambulance. He needs to stop this foolishness." But someone ignored her. I could hear the hurried steps, the muffled voice on the phone. The words collapsed and not responsive. My mom's protests grew sharper, angrier, but underneath it all, I could hear Marlene's quiet laughter, soft, almost satisfied. The next clear memory I have is the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder, cutting through the tension like a blade. My mom's voice grew shrill as she argued with someone, probably insisting that everything was under control. Marlene's tone turned smug as she muttered something about drama queens. And then the front door opened, and the paramedics stepped in. Their heavy boots against the hardwood echoed through the silence that had fallen over the dining room. They took one look at me sprawled on the floor, struggling to breathe, and their calm but urgent voices changed the entire atmosphere in an instant. "Get a space. Now." The authority in their tone silenced everyone, even my mom. Chairs screeched as people scrambled back. For the first time that night, Marlene's smirk faltered ever so slightly. The paramedics worked quickly, asking me questions I could barely answer, checking my pulse, monitoring my breathing. I could hear one of them muttering something about stress-induced cardiac events or possible arrhythmia, and the urgency in their voices made the room's atmosphere heavier than it had ever been. I felt a strange combination of relief and anger. Relief that finally, someone was taking me seriously. Anger because my own family had treated me like I was performing, like my pain was entertainment, until it became undeniable, until my body couldn't lie anymore. My mom hovered at the edge of the circle, arms crossed tightly, voice sharp when she spoke to the paramedics. "He doesn't need an ambulance. He's dramatic, that's all. It's a minor issue." "Ma'am," one of them said firmly, without even looking at her, "we'll determine that. Please step back." I could see the muscle in my mom's jaw clench. She didn't like being told no, especially by people she couldn't control. Marlene, on the other hand, lingered slightly back, watching with an odd mixture of amusement and curiosity. It was like she was enjoying the discomfort my mom was feeling almost as much as she had enjoyed mine. Ezra stood frozen, eyes wide, suddenly quiet. Even he couldn't dismiss what was happening now. I could feel the adrenaline fading from my system, leaving me drained and sore, but clearer in thought than I'd been all night. As the paramedics prepped me to be moved, I caught snippets of my mom's murmuring, directed more to herself than anyone else. "This is ridiculous. I can't believe this is happening. He's ruined everything." And that's when it hit me. Not the physical pain, not the fear, but the truth I had buried under years of forced smiles and dutiful obedience. She didn't care that I was struggling. She didn't care that I might have died tonight. She cared about control, about appearances, about being embarrassed in front of her sister and the rest of the family. The realization sank in with a cold, sinking weight. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. Not if it was up to me. When they lifted me onto the stretcher, I felt her hand on my shoulder, rough, insistent. "This isn't how it should have happened. You're overreacting." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I didn't shrink. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "This is exactly how it should have happened. Because now everyone sees." Marlene smirked faintly, probably thinking I was still weak, still performing. But I felt something shift in me. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning of a reckoning I had been planning in the back of my mind for years, even if I hadn't realized it. The paramedics wheeled me toward the door. My mom followed, protesting under her breath. Marlene lingered at the threshold, arms crossed, her eyes calculating. I knew she would be watching everything, storing it for later. Every word, every look, the way she always did. In the ambulance, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The motion of the vehicle, the controlled voices of the paramedics, the hum of equipment, it all felt like a bubble separating me from the suffocating air of my family's dining room. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the rage simmer. Rage at the way they had treated me all these years. Rage at the way my mom and aunt had always turned my life into a performance to be judged. Rage at Ezra's apathy, at the cousin's whispers, at the casual cruelty that had been normalized in that house. And then a plan started to form. I wasn't going to get revenge by confronting them directly. Not yet. They were too entrenched, too cocky, and they thrived on attention and chaos. No, I would be smarter. I would be methodical, slow. I would expose them in a way that they could not spin or control. Every petty insult, every calculated slight, every laugh they had shared at my expense would come back to them. As the paramedics worked, I thought about the records, the pictures, the social media posts my aunt and mom had carefully curated to make themselves look perfect. The stories they had told to friends, neighbors, and family. Every exaggeration they had made to put me in my place could be used against them. And I would use it. By the time I arrived at the hospital, the first wave of tests confirmed that my condition had been serious. Stress, adrenaline, and underlying heart issues had collided in a way that could have been fatal. They admitted me immediately. It was while I lay in that hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, that I realized something else. My mom and Marlene weren't just villains. They were predictable villains. They thrived on control, on the assumption that everyone else would play by their rules. And I had just learned the rules better than anyone. I had watched them, lived through their manipulations, and now I had an advantage. I started keeping a record, dates, incidents, conversations. Every snide remark, every attempt to humiliate me, every time my mom or aunt tried to dictate how I should feel or behave. I had a digital diary that grew each day, full of screenshots, voice recordings, and notes. I didn't share it with anyone, not yet. Not until the moment was right. The moment of reckoning wouldn't be in a hospital room. It wouldn't be a shouting match at dinner. It would be quiet, methodical, unstoppable. And then the call came. Marlene had left a voicemail on my phone, though I couldn't answer it from the hospital. I played it back slowly through the speaker. Her voice was calm, calculated, dripping with the same false sweetness she always used. "Nash, darling, I hear you've been making quite a scene. I suppose that's your way of trying to control everyone, just like Mom always said. But don't think this changes anything. You can't play us, and you certainly can't ruin what we've built. We'll see you soon." Her words, meant to intimidate, had the opposite effect. They lit a fire under me that I hadn't felt in years. I realized then that she had underestimated me. Every plan she had, every assumption she made about my weakness, she didn't know the half of it. I spent the next few days in the hospital, fully aware of how fragile my position was. My mom had tried to visit, but the nurses kept her at the edge of the room, unable to override the paramedics' insistence that I needed rest and monitoring. She hovered, complaining quietly to anyone who would listen about the drama I'd caused. Marlene, of course, had already found a way to spin it on social media, sending out a vague post about a family emergency without actually acknowledging my condition. But I didn't need their concern or approval. I had something better, time to plan. I began by going through the digital trail of my family's manipulations. Old messages, photos from previous gatherings, even recordings of conversations where they'd insulted or undermined me. It wasn't just cathartic, it was strategic. Every comment my mom made about appearances, every sly remark from Marlene about my supposed theatrics, every sneer from Ezra, they were all ammunition. When I was discharged, I didn't go home. I rented a small apartment across town, where I could operate without their interference. I started quietly reaching out to the people who had been witnesses to their cruelty over the years. Family friends, distant relatives, neighbors. Not to complain, not to beg, but to simply document. Every account of their behavior was logged, every corroboration carefully stored. The first real move came on my birthday. I invited my mom and Marlene over under the guise of a family lunch. Naturally, they were delighted to be included. They thought I was weak, pliable, grateful for their presence. I welcomed them warmly, smiling as they entered, letting them settle in. My mom was still sharp, still trying to control everything. Seating, plates, conversation. Marlene carried her usual smirk, surveying the room like a queen. I let them enjoy the illusion for a while, knowing it made their guard drop. Then, subtly, I started to unravel it. I placed framed photos on the mantel, ones that showed moments of their manipulation and cruelty. Small things, a picture from my graduation with Mom whispering into Marlene's ear, Marlene laughing while I stood silently, ignored. My guests, other family friends I had invited without warning, noticed immediately. Whispers started. I let the tension build, watching my mom grow visibly uncomfortable, her perfect composure cracking. Marlene's smirk faltered, her usual control slipping. I didn't confront them directly at first. I let the evidence speak for itself. The more they tried to laugh off the discomfort, the more I laid it out. Printed screenshots, documented conversations, even voice recordings from prior events. They were all there, neatly organized in folders, ready to be shared with anyone who would listen. By the time I spoke, the room was tight with suspense. I didn't yell. I didn't dramatize. I just calmly said, "You both have spent years controlling how people see you, pretending to be perfect, while humiliating me every step of the way. That ends now. Everyone here knows the truth." It was like a switch flipped. My mom's face went red, her mouth opening and closing without words. Marlene's smirk turned into a grimace. The other guests started murmuring among themselves, shock and disbelief spreading. Ezra, who had tried to remain aloof, finally broke. I didn't realize, but his voice trailed off. I turned to him sharply. "You didn't realize what? That they treat people like property? That their family gatherings are a performance designed to humiliate and control? You knew, and you ignored it." The rest of the day unfolded with my family exposed. My mom tried to argue, tried to rewrite history, but the evidence was irrefutable. Marlene attempted to charm the witnesses, but it was too late. Her smirk didn't hold. The friends and relatives who had observed their behavior for years began recounting their own experiences, stories I had collected but hadn't yet shared. By evening, the dynamic had shifted entirely. My mom retreated to the kitchen, muttering about my ungratefulness, while Marlene left, slamming the door behind her. My cousin Ezra sat in stunned silence, no longer able to assert any dominance. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was clear. Invitations stopped coming to the manipulated family dinners. The social network my mom had relied upon to maintain her image quietly distanced themselves. Marlene's social media posts became more defensive, trying to salvage appearances, but the ripple effect of truth had already spread. In the months after that dinner, life settled into a quieter, steadier rhythm. I never invited my mom, Marlene, or Ezra to any family events again. I focused on the people who treated me with respect, the friends and relatives who had quietly supported me all along. My mom tried a few times to reach out, sending texts and emails that were thinly veiled attempts to guilt me, but I didn't respond. Marlene attempted to charm or manipulate mutual acquaintances into taking her side, but the stories from that night had already cemented their reputations. Even Ezra learned to keep his opinions to himself, aware now that siding with cruelty didn't protect him from consequences. I rebuilt my own sense of family around trust, kindness, and accountability. My parents' house became something I only passed by, a reminder of how power and control can be weaponized, but also of how carefully planned patience can turn the tables. In the end, I didn't just reclaim my life. I exposed the people who had long thrived on humiliation and entitlement, and in doing so, I finally got the closure I had been denied for years. My mom and aunt remained villains in their own eyes, but in mine, they were powerless, and that was enough. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. My name's Anthony. I'm 37, married, and a dad to a 7-year-old boy named Liam. I work in IT, which means I spend most of my days behind a screen fixing other people's urgent problems, but the real challenges in my life don't come from my job, they come from my family. More specifically, my mom and my older sister, Clara. If you ask them, they'd both tell you that family means everything, but I've learned that in their dictionary, family really just means them. Growing up, Clara was always the favorite. She was the golden example mom loved to brag about. Clara got straight A's. Clara made the cheer squad. Clara got accepted into that great university. Meanwhile, I was the quiet kid who liked drawing and computers, two things my mom considered nice hobbies, but not real passions. My dad tried to even things out, but after he passed away 6 years ago, mom's favoritism became more blatant than ever. Clara had 2 kids, Ava and Miles, and from that point on, they became mom's entire world. Every holiday, every family event, every Sunday dinner revolved around them. Don't get me wrong, I don't resent my sister's kids. They're great kids. What gets under my skin is how my mom treats Liam like he's a distant cousin instead of her only grandson on my side. She forgets his birthday gifts, mixes up his age, and once even gave him one of Ava's old toys that still had Ava's name on it in permanent marker. The hurt on Liam's face that day stuck with me. I let it go because I didn't want to make a scene, but inside, I was fuming. So when Mom called one Sunday afternoon, saying she had amazing news, I didn't expect much. But her voice had that sing-song tone she used when she thought she was doing something generous, so I picked up. "Anthony," she started, "I just wanted to tell you. I've booked us a family trip. We're all going to Disneyland." I blinked. "Wait, seriously? That's actually really nice, Mom." I looked over at Liam, who was building a small Lego castle on the living room floor. The idea of taking him to Disneyland lit something up in my chest. He'd been obsessed with the idea ever since watching a YouTube video about it. I pictured his face when I'd tell him. Mom went on, "Yes, it's been too long since we've done something as a family. I figured we could all use a little getaway." "That sounds great," I said, genuinely smiling for once. "When's the trip?" "In August," she said. "Perfect timing before school starts. Clara helped me pick the dates." "Cool. Should I send you money for our tickets, or—" There was a small pause, just long enough for something to feel off. "Oh, don't worry about that," she said, her tone suddenly lighter, evasive. "We've got it covered." I hesitated. "What do you mean covered? You're paying for all of us." "Well," she trailed off, then laughed in that nervous way she did when she was trying to gloss over something. "We only had enough to cover Clara's family for now, but we thought maybe you and Liam could come later or drive down and meet us." The words didn't sink in at first. "Wait, what?" "It's just, airfare is expensive," she said quickly. "And since Clara's kids have never been, we thought we'd start with them this year. You understand, right? We can always plan something for you guys another time." I sat there in stunned silence, the phone pressed against my ear. "You said this trip was for everyone," I finally said, my voice quieter than I meant. "It is," she insisted. "It's a family trip." "Except my family," I said flatly. "Oh, Anthony, don't be so dramatic," she sighed. "You know how things are. It's not personal. We just, well, Clara and I already booked everything through the airline account, and they didn't have enough tickets left in the promotion deal. It's really no big deal." "No big deal." I stared at Liam, who was humming to himself as he stacked the last Lego brick on his castle. I could already imagine how he'd react when I told him we weren't going. He'd smile politely, maybe ask if Grandma didn't want him there. He'd ask why, and what could I even say? That Grandma ran out of tickets. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. My wife, Nora, came into the room a few minutes later, holding a basket of laundry. "You look like you just saw a ghost," she said. "It's my mom," I muttered. "She booked a family trip to Disneyland. But apparently, family doesn't include us." Nora frowned. "You're kidding." "Nope. Only Clara and her kids are going. Mom said they didn't have enough tickets." "Did she even invite you?" "Technically, yes," I said bitterly. "But she made it sound like we were supposed to be grateful for the idea of being thought about." Nora put down the basket. "That's cruel, Anthony. Especially to Liam." I nodded slowly. "I know." That night, after we put Liam to bed, I sat at my desk staring at the shared airline account we'd all used for years. My dad had set it up when we were younger, and the family had kept using it for trips and points. Mom and Clara still used it all the time, and I'd been the one managing the login since I worked in tech. The account was under my dad's name, which automatically transferred to me after his passing, though they probably never realized what that actually meant. Out of curiosity, I logged in. And there it was, for tickets to Disneyland, booked under Clara's name. 2 adults, 2 children, all fully refundable. I wasn't planning on doing anything. Not yet. I just stared at the bookings, my cursor hovering over the cancel flight option. I wasn't even angry at that moment, just tired. Tired of being treated like the family's backup option, the afterthought. Tired of my son being the one who noticed the things I tried to downplay. The next morning, while I was making breakfast, Liam walked into the kitchen in his pajamas. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy." He climbed onto a stool and looked at me with that serious little expression he gets when he's thinking hard. "Grandma said we're not going to Disneyland." My chest tightened. "Who told you that?" "Ava," he said softly. "She said they're going with Grandma and Aunt Clara. She said it's the whole family trip." I set down the spatula. "I'm sorry, bud," I said. "Grandma didn't get tickets for us this time." He looked down at the counter. Did I do something wrong? That question shattered something inside me. I knelt beside him, taking his small hand. Hey, you didn't do anything wrong. You're amazing, okay? Sometimes grown-ups just make bad decisions. That's all. He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. He just quietly ate his breakfast after that, swinging his feet under the stool, eyes downcast. That day, I went through the motions at work, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time I thought of Liam's question, did I do something wrong? My stomach churned. That night, after Nora went to bed, I sat in front of my computer again, logged back into the shared airline account, and stared at those bookings. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't let this slide. Not this time. And that's when something inside me clicked, a calm, focused kind of anger I hadn't felt before. Because if Mom wanted to play favorites using my dad's legacy, she was about to learn what happens when the forgotten son finally stops being quiet. Over the next few weeks, I tried to push the whole Disneyland situation out of my mind. I told myself to just let it go, that confronting my mom or sister wouldn't change anything. But that resolve didn't last long. Every time I checked social media, Clara was posting about how excited they all were for the family trip. Pictures of matching t-shirts, Minnie Mouse ears for the kids, even a caption that said, "Can't wait for the best family vacation ever. So grateful to Mom for making this happen, best family vacation ever." Liam saw one of those posts when I accidentally left my phone unlocked. He didn't say anything, but I could see the way his shoulders slumped, the way his little fingers tapped the edge of the counter before he walked off quietly. It wasn't just about missing out on Disneyland. It was the realization that he wasn't part of what they called family. That kind of thing sticks with a kid. A few days later, Mom called again. I thought maybe she was calling to make things right. I was wrong. "Anthony," she said in that overly sweet tone that immediately put me on edge. "I just wanted to check. Are you still okay to drive Clara and the kids to the airport?" For a moment, I couldn't even process what she said. "What?" "Well, it just makes sense," she continued breezily. "You live closest to them, and since you're not going on the trip, it would be such a big help if you could take them. You know how hard it is for Clara to juggle all that luggage with the kids." I let out a dry laugh. "You want me to drive my sister's family to the airport for a trip I wasn't even invited to?" "Oh, don't make it sound like that," she said sharply, her tone switching from sweet to defensive. "You're part of the family, Anthony. We just didn't include us." I finished for her. She sighed. "You're being petty. I thought you were more mature than this." I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood. "You thought wrong," I said, and hung up before she could say another word. That conversation stuck in my head the entire week. It wasn't even about the trip anymore. It was about the pattern. The way Mom and Clara always expected me to be the helper, the backup plan, the one who quietly handled logistics while they took all the credit. It was like I was permanently cast as the supporting character in their family narrative. That Friday, Nora's patience finally cracked. "You can't just keep letting them do this," she said, crossing her arms at the kitchen table. "It's not just unfair to you anymore. It's unfair to Liam. He sees how they treat you. He sees how they treat him." "I know," I said, rubbing my temples. "But if I push back, they'll just twist it like I'm the problem. You've seen how they are." "Then let them," she said firmly. "They already act like you're the problem when you stay quiet. You might as well earn the title." She wasn't wrong. A few days later, Mom invited us to Sunday dinner, something she hadn't done in weeks. Nora didn't want to go, but I did. I needed to see them, to really look at them, before I decided what to do next. When we arrived, the house looked the same as always, spotless, lavender-scented, and full of framed pictures of Clara and her kids. There was exactly one photo of me on the wall, a family shot from years ago where I was half-cropped out of the frame. Mom greeted us with her usual half-hearted hug. "Oh, you made it," she said, as if she'd been surprised I'd shown up at all. "Come in, dinner's almost ready." Clara was already there, sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. "Hey, little brother," she said without looking up. "You bring dessert?" I frowned. "No one told me to." "Oh, Mom said you'd probably bring something. I guess we'll just have to make do." She gave a mock sigh, her tone dripping with fake disappointment. Liam tugged on my sleeve, whispering, "Dad, can I go play with Ava and Miles?" "Sure," I said softly. He ran off, clutching a small action figure he'd brought along. Dinner was a tense blur of small talk and thinly veiled jabs. Mom went on and on about the trip plans. what rides they'd go on, what hotels they'd booked, even how she'd gotten matching lanyards for the kids. She didn't once acknowledge that Liam was sitting right there, silently picking at his mashed potatoes. At one point, she turned to Clara. "I just can't wait to see the kids' faces when we get there," she said, smiling warmly. "It's going to be magical." "I bet," Clara said, nudging her glass. "They've been counting down the days." I felt my stomach twist. I glanced at Liam, who was staring down at his plate, pretending not to listen. Nora gave me a look that said everything she didn't have to say out loud. After dinner, when the kids went to the living room, I finally spoke. "You know," I said quietly, "it's a little cruel to keep talking about the trip like that in front of Liam." Mom looked at me, genuinely surprised. "Cruel? Don't be ridiculous. He's fine. He'll get over it." "Get over being excluded?" I said. "He's 7, Mom. He doesn't understand why Grandma's taking his cousins somewhere he's not allowed to go." "Oh, Anthony," she said with a dismissive laugh, "you always overthink everything. You're too sensitive." Clara chimed in without looking up from her phone. "He's a kid. He'll forget about it the second he gets a new toy." The casualness in her tone made something in me snap. "You know what, Clara? He's not like your kids. He actually notices when people treat him differently." She rolled her eyes. "Here we go again." Mom's expression hardened. "Don't raise your voice at your sister." "I'm not raising my voice," I said evenly. "I'm just tired of pretending this is okay." "You're ruining dinner," Mom said coldly. "Can we not have one nice evening without you creating drama?" "Drama," I repeated, almost laughing. "You excluded my family from a vacation, made us sit through dinner hearing every little detail about it. And I'm the one creating drama?" Clara scoffed. "Maybe if you were more grateful once in a while, Mom wouldn't feel like she has to tiptoe around you." "Grateful," I repeated. "For what?" "Being ignored." That was when Mom stood up, her hands shaking. "That's enough. I will not tolerate this attitude in my house. If you're so unhappy, you can leave." For a second, I thought about apologizing. Old habits die hard. But then I looked at Liam again, sitting quietly on the rug, his little shoulders hunched as he played alone while his cousins laughed nearby. And something in me hardened. "Fine," I said, standing up. "We'll leave." Nora gathered our things without a word. Liam looked confused but followed. As we walked out the door, Mom called after me, her voice sharp with indignation. "You always have to make yourself the victim, Anthony. That's why no one enjoys being around you." I didn't respond. I just opened the car door for Liam, waited until he was buckled in, and started the engine. The drive home was silent, except for the sound of the turn signal clicking. When we got home, Nora turned to me. "You know they're not going to stop, right?" "I know," I said quietly. "But I think it's time I stopped pretending they will." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word from dinner. Every time Mom dismissed me, every time Clara smirked like she'd won something. The next morning, I woke up early, made a cup of coffee, and sat down at my desk. I opened my laptop, logged into the shared airline account again, and stared at the flight reservations. My dad's name was still listed as the account holder. The bookings were all tied to the points he'd accumulated back when he traveled for work, points that technically now belonged to me. I hesitated, my cursor hovering over the cancel button again. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about fairness, about boundaries, about finally standing up for myself and for Liam. Still, I hesitated. My rational side told me to leave it, to be the bigger person. But then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara. "Clara, hey, can you do me a quick favor? I forgot to add our TSA pre-check numbers to the booking. Can you log in and fix it? You've got the login, right?" "No, please." "No, thank you." Just another assumption that I'd handle things for her. I stared at the message for a long time. And that's when something inside me settled. Not anger this time. Just a quiet, steady certainty. They'd taken advantage of me for years. Used me. Dismissed me. Treated me like I didn't matter. And now, they'd crossed the one line they couldn't come back from. I typed a short reply. "Sure thing." Then I opened the booking details, selected all 4 flights, and clicked cancel. A confirmation box popped up. "Refund will be processed to the primary account within 24 hours. I hit confirm. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message, it was a barrage. "Clara, what did you do?" "Mom, Anthony, why are the flights canceled?" "Clara, The airline says we got refunded. Fix this now. I didn't reply. Not yet. I just let the messages stack up while I poured myself another cup of coffee. Then, finally, I typed one line back to Clara. Just making sure the whole family trip is fair. For a few blissful minutes after I hit send, the house was quiet. I sat back in my chair, feeling that strange, heavy calm that comes after years of pent-up frustration finally spill over. I wasn't proud, exactly, but I wasn't sorry either. I'd done what needed to be done. I told myself it wasn't about revenge, it was about standing up for myself and my son. But deep down, I knew it was a bit of both. That calm didn't last long. My phone started lighting up with a fury I'd never seen before. Clara called first. I didn't answer. Then Mom. Then Clara again. Finally, a string of texts came in so fast, it almost froze my screen. Mom, what have you done, Anthony? You ruined everything. Clara, they refunded to your account. You need to send it back right now. Mom, you're acting like a child. This was supposed to be special for the kids. Clara, I had to tell them the trip was off. Do you have any idea how hard that was? Mom, you've embarrassed the family. Embarrassed the family. Of course. That was always her line when I stopped letting her control the narrative. Nora came into the room, still in her pajamas, holding a mug. I'm guessing the fireworks started? I nodded. Oh, they're livid. She leaned over, reading the texts, then gave a small, approving smile. Good. Maybe now they'll finally understand they can't treat you like an errand boy. I doubt it, I muttered. If anything, they'll just double down. I was right. By noon, Mom was at my front door. No text. No warning. Just bang, bang, bang. Nora glanced at me. You sure you want to open it? I sighed. Might as well. The second I opened the door, Mom pushed past me, her perfume filling the hallway like a cloud. She looked furious, hair disheveled, eyes wild in a way I hadn't seen since my teenage years. How dare you? She snapped, her voice already rising. You canceled the flights. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? Good morning to you too, I said dryly. Don't get smart with me, she barked. You had no right. Actually, I said, keeping my voice calm, I did. Dad's account transferred to me when he passed. Legally, I'm the account holder. I've been paying the annual fees. Those points were mine. That's not the point, she shouted. You sabotaged your sister's trip out of spite. I canceled the tickets, I said evenly, because you made a family trip that excluded half the family. Her mouth tightened. Don't twist this into something it's not. We simply didn't have enough money for everyone. Then don't call it a family trip, I interrupted. Call it what it was, a trip for Clara's family. There's a difference. You always have to play the victim, she snapped, jabbing a finger at me. You could have offered to pay your own way if it mattered that much. I stared at her, disbelief spreading through me. You told me it was already booked. You said there were no tickets left. She hesitated, eyes flicking away for a moment before she recovered. Well, yes, but we could have made it work if you'd been more flexible. You always expect things handed to you. That line hit like a slap. Expected things handed to me. This, from the woman who'd handed everything to my sister her whole life. Mom, I said slowly. Do you even hear yourself? Don't you dare talk to me like that, she hissed. I raised you. I've done more for you than you'll ever appreciate. I could feel Nora's presence behind me. Quiet, steady, watching. You raised me, sure, I said. But you also spent my entire life reminding me that I wasn't enough. And now you're doing it to my son. That finally made her flinch. Just a little. Liam, she said, her voice softening for a fraction of a second. Oh, don't be ridiculous, Anthony. I love him. Then why didn't you want him there? I asked. She folded her arms. Because he's sensitive. You know how he gets overwhelmed. Disneyland isn't for every child. I just stared at her. You mean it's not for my child? She sighed dramatically. You're twisting everything I say. I can't even talk to you when you're like this. Then don't, I said quietly. You can leave. Her eyes widened like I'd just struck her. What did you say to me? I said you can leave. I repeated, opening the door wider. I'm done arguing about this. You owe Liam an apology, not me. She didn't move. For a moment, I thought she might actually cry. But then her face hardened again. You've changed, she said coldly. Ever since Nora came into your life, you've become selfish. You think you're better than us. That stung, not because I believed it, but because it was such a classic move. Deflect, project, accuse. I don't think I'm better than you. I said. I just don't want to be treated like I'm less. Her lip trembled, and for the briefest moment, I thought she might apologize. But then she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard that one of the picture frames rattled. For a long while after she left, the house was quiet again. Liam was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the chaos. Nora leaned against the wall, exhaling. "Well," she said softly, "that went about as well as expected." "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. "But it's not over. I can feel it." And I was right again. By evening, the group text started. Clara added me, Mom, and even a few of our extended relatives, an audience, because of course she needed one. "Clara, everyone, just so you know, Anthony canceled our flights to Disneyland. The kids are devastated. Mom, he's been acting unstable lately. I think Nora's been influencing him." Aunt Marie, "Wait, what? Why would he do that?" Clara, "Out of jealousy. He always ruins things when he's not the center of attention." Mom, "Your father would be ashamed, Anthony." That one hit harder than I wanted it to. My dad and I had been close. He was quiet, kind, the opposite of my mom in every way. He used to say, "Son, don't let their noise drown you out. You know your worth, even if they don't." He was the only person who ever defended me in that house. And now, they were using his memory as a weapon against me. I stared at the screen for a long minute before typing back. Me. Dad would be ashamed, yeah, but not of me. He'd be ashamed that you used his account to exclude his grandson. Then I muted the group and put my phone down. That night, Liam woke up around 10 p.m. and wandered into the living room, rubbing his eyes. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy." He climbed onto the couch beside me. "Ava called me," he said quietly. My stomach tightened. "She did?" "Yeah. She said Grandma told her I was mean for canceling their trip." His voice cracked just a little. "I didn't do anything, did I?" I felt something in me go cold. "No, buddy. You didn't. You did nothing wrong." He nodded, but his little face looked so defeated that I had to look away. I could deal with my mother's manipulations, my sister's tantrums, but dragging my son into it? That was a line I never thought even they would cross. The next morning, I found out how deep that betrayal went. Nora walked in while I was making coffee, holding her phone. "You need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. She handed me her phone, and there it was, a Facebook post from my mother. "Heartbroken today. Some people will never understand the meaning of family until they destroy it. All we wanted was a magical trip for the grandkids, but jealousy and bitterness ruined it. Please pray for us, and especially for the kids who are confused and hurt." The comments section was flooded with sympathy. "Oh no, that's awful. Some people just can't stand to see others happy. Sending love to Clara and the kids." And then, the one that made my jaw tighten. "Wait, was this about your son, Anthony? I remember you saying he's always been difficult." I didn't even realize my hands were shaking until Nora reached over and took the phone back. "This isn't just toxic," she said softly. "This is malicious. She's painting me as the villain," I muttered, "and she's using my dad's memory to do it." Nora hesitated. "You need to respond, Anthony. You can't just let her rewrite what happened." "I will," I said, "but not yet." Because as furious as I was, something in me clicked at that moment. A realization that this had gone past simple family drama. This was war. And wars aren't won by shouting matches or angry texts. They're won by strategy. For now, I kept quiet. I let them talk, gossip, spin their story. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them sure that I'd back down again, like I always did. Because the next move I was planning would change the balance of power in our family for good. And when I finally played that card, it wouldn't just be about the canceled flights anymore. It would be about exposing the truth behind years of manipulation and making sure my son never had to question whether he was wanted again. That moment, the betrayal, the lies, the way my mom turned the whole family against me, was the breaking point. The emotional turning point that made one thing crystal clear. I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore. I was taking everything back. After the Facebook post, life didn't immediately get better. In fact, the next few weeks were some of the loneliest I'd ever experienced. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach sank. The texts didn't stop, they intensified. Clara's messages were nonstop, alternating between guilt tripping me, pleading for the family trip to be reinstated, and outright insults. Mom's were worse, carefully phrased barbs about how I ruined the family, how I was letting bitterness control my life, and how she was praying for me because clearly I was so lost. Even some distant relatives, who normally had nothing to do with our family affairs, chimed in with passive-aggressive comments about fairness, responsibility, and how I needed to grow up. At first, I tried to respond. I tried to defend myself, to explain the truth. But every message I sent was twisted, dissected, and turned against me. I felt like I was screaming in a vacuum. Every reply made me more exhausted, more frustrated, and eventually, I realized the only thing I could do was step back. It was crushing. For the first time in years, I questioned myself. Was I overreacting? Was I being unreasonable? Sitting in the quiet of our living room at night, watching Liam sleep, I felt that heavy weight of hopelessness, the feeling of being completely alone in the world with your own family against you. And yet, even in that darkness, a small, stubborn spark refused to die. I couldn't let them win, not for me, but for Liam. I started small. I stopped engaging with their messages entirely. I muted their group chats, blocked notifications from Mom and Clara, and decided to focus on building my own space, literally and metaphorically. Instead of letting their chaos define my days, I began creating routines for myself and my family that were unshakable. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects with a focus I hadn't had in years. I was developing a new internal tool for our company that automated a process people had been complaining about for months. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it was something I could control. I started waking up earlier, exercising with more discipline, and making meals for Liam that were both healthy and fun. Slowly, the chaos around me felt like it belonged to someone else, and my life began to feel like it was actually my own. Nora was a rock through all of this. She encouraged me to keep my distance, to stop trying to justify myself, and to channel my energy into something productive. "They're trying to make you react," she said one evening as we cooked dinner together. "If you react, you're giving them power. Don't. Build your life instead." It wasn't easy. There were nights I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, imagining every angry phone call, every cutting remark, every public humiliation. The sting of betrayal burned fresh every morning. But those nights also became my thinking time. Quiet, undisturbed thinking time where I could plan. I started keeping a notebook, writing down every slight, every pattern of manipulation, every way Mom and Clara had tried to control me over the years. It was methodical, clinical. I wasn't letting emotion run the show anymore. I was collecting facts. And then, slowly, opportunities started to appear. The IT tool I'd been developing at work caught the attention of my manager. Within a month, I was asked to lead a small team to implement the tool across other departments. It wasn't a huge promotion, but it gave me influence, and for the first time in years, I had authority that no one could undermine. No mom, no sister, no relatives with their opinions. With each success, the spark inside me grew. I started networking outside my department, quietly learning about management and operations, finding ways to make myself indispensable. I wasn't doing this for revenge yet, not overtly, but I was building the foundation. If life had taught me anything over the years, it was that patience was far more dangerous than impulsiveness. Wait long enough, learn enough, and when the right moment came, the impact would be undeniable. At home, Liam noticed the change too. He became more relaxed, more confident. He no longer questioned whether he was wanted or loved. I made sure of it. I scheduled weekly outings with him, little adventures that were just for us. We went hiking, visited local museums, and even tried a small indoor climbing gym. He was thriving, and watching him grow in confidence, knowing he was cherished and prioritized, became my personal fuel. Meanwhile, the family's attacks continued in muted forms. I could still see Facebook posts, passive-aggressive comments, and occasionally I'd catch wind of them talking about me in group messages where I wasn't included. But each time, it hurt less. I had learned to distance myself emotionally. They could try to manipulate and shame me, but it no longer had power over my life. Then, one day, I got an idea, a way to turn all of my quiet preparation into something with teeth. During a lunch break, I discovered that a family-owned travel agency Mom and Clara had been working with for years actually had some loopholes in their booking system, especially when it came to using accumulated points across multiple accounts. If I was careful, I could leverage those loopholes, not to harm Clara's kids, but to reclaim control of how family travel was handled from now on. It was subtle, meticulous work. I researched travel law, airline policies, and customer protections. I created spreadsheets, ran simulations, and even drafted emails as if I were a neutral party advocating for fairness. No one knew I was doing it. I didn't want anyone to suspect I was building something, because if they did, they'd sabotage it. All the while, my personal life improved dramatically. Nora and I strengthened our partnership, deepening our trust and communication. Liam was happier than he'd been in years. I had more confidence at work and began getting recognition for things I'd quietly accomplished, things Mom and Clara had always claimed they were capable of but never did. I wasn't just surviving, I was quietly thriving. By the end of that summer, a full 3 months after the canceled Disneyland debacle, I had transformed my situation completely. I had a growing professional reputation, a calm and happy home life, and a personal sense of power that was completely untouchable by them. I wasn't acting out in anger anymore. I was acting strategically. And the irony was that while they believed they had hurt me, they had only fueled my rise. But the real turning point, the moment when the rise would intersect with the betrayal and finally tip the scales in my favor, came unexpectedly. One Saturday afternoon, I received a message that seemed innocent at first, just another social media notification. But it wasn't. It was from Clara, and the tone made my skin crawl. "Clara, Anthony, Mom and I were thinking, maybe you should just leave things be. But if you really care about Liam, you'll let us make this right. We're planning another trip soon." I froze. Another trip. That's all she said. No apology, no acknowledgement, no accountability. Just another attempt to pull Liam into their control. And I realized then that patience alone wasn't enough. I had prepared, I had grown stronger, I had created opportunities, but if I didn't act with precision, they would never stop trying to manipulate our lives. I leaned back in my chair and smiled quietly to myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting out of hurt or anger. I wasn't trying to prove myself. I was planning, waiting, positioning myself. The next step wouldn't just reclaim what they tried to take. It would make sure they could never hurt Liam or me, the way they had for decades. That night, I opened my notebook and started mapping out exactly how I was going to leverage everything I'd learned. Every slight, every manipulation, every instance of favoritism was now a data point. I began constructing a network of steps, small, unnoticeable moves that would eventually converge into a moment so precise, so undeniable, that they wouldn't be able to deny it or spin it. As I sat there, plotting quietly, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about the trips, or the favoritism, or even the humiliation. It was about control. About showing my family that the quiet, underestimated son, the one they dismissed, the one they thought would always follow their rules, could rise, claim authority, and reshape the dynamics entirely. And from that quiet place of determination, I knew something else too. They had pushed me to my rock bottom, shattered trust, and tried to humiliate me. But in doing so, they had unknowingly handed me the blueprint for my rise. By the time I finally closed my notebook and looked at Liam sleeping in the next room, I felt lighter than I had in years. The tension, the resentment, the betrayal, they were all still there. Yes, but now they were tools. Weapons. Levers. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that the rise was only the beginning. The family might have thought they had won by excluding us, by shaming me, by manipulating everyone around us. But they had no idea what I was capable of when I stopped playing by their rules and started building on my own. If you'd asked me a year earlier what revenge looked like, I'd probably have muttered something petty, like hiding Clara's car keys or posting an embarrassing baby photo on her feed. But this wasn't about petty. I'd learned the hard way that the only thing that ever forced my family to change was proof they couldn't twist, and the only way to get that proof was to be meticulous, lawful, and unflinchingly calm. The whole thing had to look like structure, not spectacle. So that's what I built. I started by finishing the notebook I'd been keeping. Every little thing I could document. Dates, times, quotes from conversations, screenshots of texts, Facebook posts with timestamps, copies of receipts where Mom had forgotten to reimburse me, the airline bookings, the points ledger in Dad's name. I had everything from the Disneyland cancellation, but I also had the small, poisonous moments that showed a pattern. The times my mom had moved money for emergencies that always ended up covering Clara's extras. the gifts that altered between kids, the invitations that turned into one-family events. The pattern was boringly consistent, and when you lay boring, ugly consistency out in black and white, it reads like evidence. Next, I layered in what I'd quietly learned in the months since. The travel agency Mom and Clara used wasn't some big faceless corporation. It was a small, family-run outfit that handled a lot of their trips. Their system had two things going for it: a vulnerability in how points were pulled across accounts, and an almost painfully friendly customer service rep who loved the drama of family travel more than was healthy. The rep, Cassie, was the kind of person who overshared on the phone and liked to help. I'd cultivated a relationship with her under a neutral guise. I noticed something odd in the booking workflow and wondered if it was a bug. She told me, with an over-earnest sincerity, how their system allowed points to be combined in ways that weren't always tightly audited. Sometimes points would be applied from accounts that technically didn't have express authorization. Sometimes agents would approve transfers because they assumed the elder account holder, Red, my dad, had wanted it. That was my opening. I didn't storm in demanding refunds and apologies. I did something smarter. I quietly requested a formal audit of the bookings tied to Dad's account, citing the account's recent activity and the unusual volume of point transfers. I posed as a concerned family member who wanted to make sure Dad's travel legacy was being used appropriately. Legally, I had the standing. The account belonged to me now. The agency, embarrassed at the idea of sloppy accounting, agreed to run a review and asked for documentation. I fed them everything: copies of Dad's old travel statements, the emails where Mom and Clara had discussed using the points, the dates. I asked for a written accounting of how the points had been applied in the last 2 years, and I asked that any bookings made with suspicious point allocations be flagged. Then I waited. Waiting felt different now. I wasn't suffering in silence. I was watching. When the audit came back 2 weeks later, it read like a ledger of favoritism. Several large point transfers to Clara's family were poorly documented. A number of bookings had been made with Dad's legacy points after his death, and in a few cases, the transfers didn't match any consent form. The agency quietly marked a couple of those bookings as irregular and put a temporary freeze on them while they investigated ownership. They emailed me a copy. I didn't post it. I didn't confront them in person. I saved the PDF and kept building the timeline. At work, the new project I developed became a quiet megaphone. Because I'd led the rollout and been good at building cross-department relationships, I now had a seat at a table where contracts and vendor relationships were sometimes discussed. One afternoon, over coffee with a manager in procurement, our conversation drifted to travel policies and vendor practices. I mentioned, casually and hypothetically, that small agencies sometimes had weak internal controls and that corporations needed to be careful when pooling benefits across accounts. That manager listened. The conversation turned into a meeting. The meeting turned into an introduction to a lawyer friend we occasionally used for vendor audits. I wasn't after legal action against my family. I was accumulating allies who could, when necessary, confirm the agency's own findings in an impartial way. All of this, my documentation, the agency audit, the quiet legal validation, gave me leverage. But leverage by itself is a dull thing without a plan for how to use it. So I built a simple, elegant pressure, a choice for Mom and Clara that would expose what they'd been doing either privately or publicly. I didn't want to embarrass the kids. I wanted to make it impossible for the adults to keep lying to everyone else. I drafted a letter. It started neutral, an explanation that, as the named account holder on Dad's travel profile, I'd authorized an audit to ensure points had been used in accordance with his wishes. It laid out the facts plainly: dates of transfers, specific bookings, and the agency's finding that several transfers lacked documentation. It concluded with an offer. We could resolve this quietly and internally by having Mom and Clara sign a short agreement acknowledging that Dad's points had been used and committing to a small restitution plan that would fund a genuinely shared family account for future trips, one administered transparently and fairly. Or, if they refused, I would share the audit with extended family and the agency would be asked to reverse suspicious transfers and reassign points to the rightful account holder. I sent that letter, not as an angry email, but as a calm PDF attached to a polite message that I delivered to Mom and Clara simultaneously and to the agency and their legal counsel, who acknowledged receipt. I also CC'd a small roster of relatives who'd always been the quiet ones, a cousin who worked in finance, an aunt who'd been on hold when my dad used to call, a few people who had always felt like witnesses but had been afraid to speak up. The goal wasn't public shaming. It was to make sure the narrative couldn't be rewritten in private. The reaction was instantaneous and theatrical. Mom called, breathless and angry and playing innocent like an expert. "You can't do this," she said, voice pitched like someone reciting someone else's lines. "You don't you dare make this a thing." Clara sent a text screaming that I'd betrayed them and that I was ruining the family. The agency, flustered, told me they'd freeze any disputed bookings pending resolution. A lawyer, whom I'd quietly hired as a safeguard, I wasn't naive. I knew they might try to claim anything, advised patience, and reminded me to stick to facts. I did. What happened next was the kind of slow, merciless unspooling I'd been preparing for. The agency, embarrassed to be involved in family drama, requested documentation from Mom about the transfers. Mom, who had always been loose with details when it came to money, found her memory suddenly selective. She gave vague explanations. "We thought it was okay. Your father wouldn't have minded. It was just for the kids." The agency pressed for signed authorizations. Clara produced some emails that looked legitimate at a glance, but my notebook had screenshots that contradicted them. The lawyer I'd consulted pointed out inconsistencies in the timestamps. Instead of confronting them publicly, I let the agency do its job. When it became clear that certain transfers could not be substantiated, the agency proposed a remedial action. Those points would be returned to Dad's account and placed under a new, jointly administered family fund. It would be accessible for trips only by mutual agreement, with a transparent ledger and joint sign-off required for any significant use. I'd suggested similar terms in my letter as the reasonable option. They accepted it. The agency's board thought it the best way to avoid litigation. When Mom and Clara realized the points were being taken out of their immediate control, their reaction was exactly what you'd expect from people who'd never had to consider losing privilege. They begged, negotiated, wept. Performative gestures meant to pull at anyone who might pressure the agency. They sent envelopes of flowers and promises of family togetherness to the quiet relatives CC'd on the email. They called the agency manager and demanded exceptions. The agency, which had been embarrassed by the publicity of a potential scandal involving Dad's legacy points, held firm. They wanted to be absolved of liability, and the cleanest absolution was a forced reconciliation, one that required transparency. There's a strange feeling when things you've been waiting for actually happen. It's not the cathartic release I'd imagined. It's quieter, colder. I remember sitting at the kitchen table when Cassie from the agency called to say the reallocation was processing. I wasn't celebrating. I was just relieved. The points were being returned to the account and held in escrow under the terms we'd proposed. Mom texted me that night, a frantic stream of messages with all caps please and half promises. Clara called me and left a voicemail, something about betrayal and ruining the children's dreams. I listened to it once, then deleted it. It served no purpose in my archive but to make me grateful I'd recorded everything earlier. But that wasn't the only thing I did. I also leveraged my new standing at work to secure something more tangible. I'd been offered a small leadership stipend and access to a corporate travel program because of the tool I'd created. Part of the program was a set of travel vouchers and a corporate rate with a major airline. The vouchers weren't generous enough to buy a Disneyland trip, but they were enough to cover a weekend getaway to a theme park-like resort nearby, and they came with perks, fast passes, front-of-line access, a private character meet and greet, the works. It wasn't Disneyland, but to a 7-year-old, it would glow. I booked it, Liam and Nora and me, 2 nights, everything paid, scheduled for a date weeks after the points were returned to Dad's account. I could have made a scene about it, posted photos to my public feed, live-streamed the trip, all the things my family accused me of wanting. But again, calmness. I told a select number of people, Nora, a couple of friends who'd been quietly supportive, and a cousin who I'd quietly included on the earlier email who I knew would show up as moral backup if things got ugly. I wanted the trip to be something safe and sacred, not bait. And then came the signature move, the family meeting. Once the agency had completed its procedural changes and the points were secured in the new, jointly administered fund, I drafted a concise message and sent it to the extended family list, the same group that had rallied around Mom's Facebook post. No vitriol, no theatrical proclamations. Just a timeline, the audit results, the agency's findings, the remedial action, and a clear statement that Dad's legacy would be protected and shared fairly going forward. I included copies of the audit and redacted screenshots that showed the pattern of favoritism. I finished by saying I was open to a mediated family meeting to discuss how to rebuild trust and use the fund for future family trips, if they wanted to remain part of that process. That email landed like a measured blow. The air in their corner of the world shifted. Mom called me, quieter than I'd ever heard her. Clara texted, but for once her messages didn't contain the blistering bravado I'd become used to. They were short, clipped, angry in a way that read like fear. A few relatives wrote privately, thanking me for bringing clarity. A few others wrote publicly, tentatively supportive. There were snipes. Why wait so long? You should have spoken up earlier. But those looked petty in the wake of the audit and the agency's confirmation. It wasn't just my word anymore. The records were objective, and they didn't care about attraction to drama or who'd been the most performative victim. For 3 days after the email, I didn't sleep much. I was waiting for the inevitable: screams, lawyers, lawsuits, some move that would drag everything into a courtroom. Instead, what I got was quieter and somehow worse for them. People started asking questions. Friends reached out to Mom, gentle and incredulous. A cousin who ran a small community group messaged her asking if there was anything they could do to help families in similar positions. My inbox filled with messages like, "I had no idea," and "I'm sorry," and "Thank you for doing this in Dad's name." Those notes mattered more than the glares from Clara's corner. The first major, visible payoff came at a family brunch someone else organized in the neighborhood, long after the initial storm of texts. Mom and Clara thought a show of togetherness might reset the narrative. They arranged a big send-off for the kids, the sort of photo op that would make nice content for Facebook. Everyone in matching shirts, smiling, a picnic spread. I was invited, because of course I was. Excluding me now would only look suspicious. I went because I wanted to look at them, to see their faces when the relatives who'd seen the audit walked around and maybe asked a question or two. As we arrived, I noticed the air was different. People who used to shrug and avoid conversation were more direct. "Hi, Anthony," said Aunt Marie in an almost conspiratorial whisper. "Thank you for sorting the travel thing. It's been confusing." The cousins I'd thought ambivalent hovered on the edges and actually made eye contact. They weren't hostile. They weren't awestruck either. They were, more than anything, relieved that the stink cloud had been cleared. Clara, sensing the undercurrent, tried to turn the brunch into a show. She gathered the kids for photos, pushed hair behind ears, posted a story with a caption about family first. But even as she posed, Mom's phone kept buzzing. She stepped away, looked at the screen with a face I'd only seen in private rages, and then sat back down, blank. For the first time since I could remember, she didn't know how to manage the optics. During the picnic, a neighbor, someone who'd seen half our family dynamics play out over years of block parties, came over and quietly said, "It's good to see a family handling things fairly." There was no shouting, no drama, just small, human acknowledgments that the balance had shifted. That evening, Clara texted me, "You think you won?" I saw the text, read it twice, and didn't respond immediately. The quiet was part of the point. I replied only once, and I kept it simple. I did what I had to so Dad's legacy is honored. That's all. I left it at that. But the thing about revenge done well is that it's not just about winning a point. It's about altering the rules. By forcing transparency on the points, by creating a structure that required joint oversight, I changed the dynamics of how family travel worked in a way they couldn't easily slip back into. More importantly, I'd shown other relatives that the narrative Mom had spun for years, of generosity that always tipped in favor of Clara, wasn't immune to scrutiny. The power balance had tilted. They reacted in other ways too. Mom stopped posting those idle, performative family updates for a while. Clara clung to a brittle anger that made her frostier in conversation, less likely to throw casual jabs. Some relatives reached out to make small peace offerings, calls that were tentative and, to my surprise, earnest. Others kept their distance. They didn't want to choose sides. And in the end, you can't make everyone like the person who exposes uncomfortable truths. There was a final, private moment that felt like the real payoff. A week after the brunch, an email landed in my inbox from a name I wouldn't have expected. My dad's old colleague, someone who'd known him well. It was short. Your father was a fair man. Thank you for making sure his things are used fairly. If you ever need a reference, let me know. I read it 3 times, and in that small, quiet way that builds someone back up, I felt the work of months translate into something deeper than victory. It was validation. And yet, even as the points were secured and the agency had its new rules, I could feel that this wasn't the last round. The family had been exposed, yes, but exposure does not always equal acceptance. There were still slights, still whispers, and the raw nerve of betrayal ran deep. Revenge had been served, calm, legal, effective, and had fundamentally changed one axis of our family life. But power, once rattled, tends to push back in unpredictable ways. That's where I stopped planning and waited to see the first counter. I wanted them to have the illusion of a chance to repair. I wanted them to choose reconciliation or further escalation. I wanted to watch which path they'd walk, because that would tell me everything about how long this fight would last. So I didn't gloat. I didn't crow. I rebuilt. I took Liam to the resort we'd booked, and I watched him run with joy that felt purer because it wasn't at someone else's expense. I made sure he knew he'd been wanted. I collected quiet victories, a friend's text saying my work's rollout was getting attention, Liam's teacher telling me how much he'd improved in confidence, Nora whispering one night that she was proud of me. But even as life improved, a part of me kept an ear tuned to the family static, because the story wasn't finished. Their next move, whether it would be contrition, a cunning attempt to regain control, or something uglier, would define the second act. I'd set the trap, and they'd either step into it by trying to spin the audit away, or they'd genuinely try to repair the damage in a way that meant something. When the first sign finally came, a text at 2 in the morning from an unknown number with a message that threatened to upend everything. I read it, closed my eyes, and felt a familiar cold climb up my spine. The victory had been real, but so was the danger that comes from poking a hornet's nest. I put my phone down and went to stand in the doorway of Liam's room, watching him sleep. For him, everything was simple and hopeful. For me, the game had only changed arenas. And the next move, when it came, would need more than evidence and paperwork. It would need precision, patience, and the willingness to do something the quiet me had never been comfortable with. Escalate in a way that would make them wish they'd never tried to make me the afterthought. The morning after the resort trip, I woke to a calm house. Liam was still asleep, curled up beside Nora on the couch after staying up late to watch fireworks with excitement that lit up his little face. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, ready to check emails before the day got busy. But the messages I saw weren't the usual complaints or frantic pleas from Mom and Clara. They were something else entirely. First, there was an email from the travel agency. Its tone was formal but unmistakably final. The audit was complete. All irregular point transfers had been corrected, with the misused points returned to Dad's legacy account. The agency noted that they had implemented stronger controls to prevent future misuse, including mandatory verification for transfers between family members. The letter was sent to Mom, Clara, and me. It was polite, concise, and, most importantly, non-negotiable. There was no way for Mom or Clara to manipulate it. Next, I opened the family email thread. Mom had sent a message addressed to all the relatives included in the audit correspondence. Her tone was defensive at first. Anthony has taken steps without consulting the family. This is upsetting and unnecessary. But as I scrolled down, I saw the truth emerge. The agency had included a summarized copy of the audit in its report, and it was impossible to spin. The numbers didn't lie, the dates didn't lie, and the documentation of point transfers didn't lie. Mom's email shifted mid-sentence from anger to pleading. I hope we can work this out for the kids' sake. Clara's response was even more revealing. She tried to regain control of the narrative by claiming that Dad would have wanted us to enjoy the points responsibly, but she had no documentation to back it up. Every statement she made contradicted the audit's findings. I could almost hear her frustration through the words. She realized that no amount of shouting, guilt-tripping, or social media drama could reverse the meticulous work I'd done. By mid-morning, a few relatives started replying to Mom and Clara privately, supporting the findings and offering to mediate a fair use of the points going forward. I didn't intervene. I watched quietly, letting them experience the consequences of their actions firsthand. It was mesmerizing, almost cinematic. Watching the ones who had built themselves on entitlement and manipulation suddenly realize that structure, documentation, and patience could dismantle their world without raising a single voice in anger. Mom called later that day. I let it ring once and then answered. "Anthony, please," she said, voice tight. "Can we talk?" "Sure," I said, calm as a winter morning. "What about the points? The audit?" I don't know what to do. I can't fix it, can I?" Her words trembled slightly, which was a novelty in itself. Mom had always commanded every room she walked into. She had always assumed control by sheer force of will. Now, she sounded human, vulnerable, defeated. "Mom," I said slowly, "you can make amends. You can participate fairly in the new family fund, follow the rules, and make sure everyone's treated equally. Or you can continue fighting against something you can't change, and you'll continue to lose. The choice is yours." There was silence on the other end. Then a deep exhale. I, I understand. I suppose I have no choice." "You always have a choice," I replied. "You just need to choose wisely this time." She didn't respond further. I hung up, feeling a quiet sense of closure. Clara, predictably, called the next day. She tried to argue, to guilt trip, to manipulate. But I had anticipated every tactic. Calm, methodical, factual. The points were inescapably accounted for. The agency confirmed everything, and my lawyer friend had offered a gentle reminder that any further attempts to interfere could be considered harassment. Clara sputtered through her first few arguments, then fell silent, realizing she had no leverage left. Eventually, she huffed and hung up. She wouldn't reach out again, not with threats, not with drama, not with her usual entitled bravado. The fallout extended beyond Mom and Clara. Several relatives who had once been neutral began treating me differently. There was a subtle shift in family gatherings, in block parties, even in casual text messages. Where I'd been dismissed or ignored before, I was now approached with respect and caution. People understood, perhaps unconsciously, that I had built something that couldn't be overturned by theatrics or manipulation. I had created a position of authority that was acknowledged silently, but universally understood. I had the power, and I had used it wisely. At work, my reputation continued to grow. The tool I had developed earned me recognition from senior management, and my calm, methodical approach to handling conflict, once an undervalued skill, was now praised. I had leverage, influence, and visibility. I was in control of my professional life, just as I had finally taken control of my personal life. The parallel wasn't lost on me. The lessons I'd learned at home, patience, preparation, documentation, strategic calm, had turned my life around entirely. But the most satisfying part, by far, was seeing the subtle psychological shift in Mom and Clara. Mom stopped trying to advise me on my life. She no longer threw casual, undermining remarks at family gatherings. Clara stopped broadcasting her little posts about family happiness that had been thinly veiled attacks. They were cautious now, aware that the infrastructure I'd built, quietly, relentlessly, would expose them if they tried anything. I didn't need to confront them again. The system I'd put in place did it for me. The final flourish came when Liam and I took our first victory outing after the whole ordeal. A small theme park, 2 nights, everything booked on my corporate vouchers. Liam didn't know the context. He just knew this was his adventure. Seeing his excitement, the pure joy on his face as he met characters, rode rides, and laughed freely, was more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could ever have been. I realized then that revenge doesn't always have to humiliate. It can simply restore balance and protect what's yours. Later that evening, as we drove home with Liam exhausted in the back seat, Nora reached over and held my hand. "You did it," she said quietly, a mixture of pride and relief in her voice. "They can't touch him, or you again." I smiled, feeling the weight of months of planning, stress, and anticipation lift slightly. "We'll see," I said, because life always has surprises, but for the first time in years, I felt untouchable. Not because I'd crushed someone beneath me, but because I had built a world where my son's happiness and my integrity were safeguarded, no matter what they tried. The next day, I received one last text from Mom. Simple, concise. She knew she had been beaten, not by anger, but by logic, preparation, and the unassailable fact that she had crossed a line. I suppose congratulations. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She understood. Clara understood. And for the first time, the entire house, Liam, Nora, and me, felt like our own sanctuary, free from the manipulation, favoritism, and toxicity that had once defined my family. I watched Liam sleep that night, the soft rhythm of his breathing a reminder of everything I'd fought for. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a deep sense of closure that didn't require theatrics or vindictive displays. The work had been smart, calm, precise, and it had worked. They had learned the hard way that manipulation has limits, entitlement has consequences, and patience combined with strategy is more powerful than anger. And in that moment, looking at my son and knowing I had protected him, I realized the true final line. I hadn't just won. I had secured our future. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.